Deuteronomy marks the end of the first 5 books of the Old Testament written by Moses. In Deuteronomy, Moses hands the torch of leadership over to Joshua. Moses knows that he can not enter the promised land and that he is soon to die. These are the last words of Moses written to the Israelites who are on the verge of entering the promised land. Moses has served as Yahweh's agent of deliverance and revelation. He is seeking to prepare his people for what is ahead. Israelites have been a stubborn people, so Moses is telling them to focus their attention on his words. These words are not merely to be heard, but to be performed so that this generation will be able to enter into the promised land. Often we add or remove words that tend to implicate us or restrict our behavior. We emphasize the sins that do not tempt us as bad while not even recognizing or at least minimizing or try to understand the sins that seem to trip us up. So Moses writes, "Do not change one word of what I am writing." Moses does not want his directions from God to be misinterpreted. Moses wants Israel to learn from its past as it looks towards its future. So here he reminds them of when Israel had strayed. Speaking of Baal of Peor, Moses is referring to the place where the Israelites turned from Yahweh and went after the fertility god of Moab, having sex with the Moabite women and worshiping Baal. 24,000 were destroyed, every man who joined in the worship of Baal, and those who held tightly to Yahweh remained fine. After he established that God is mighty and God has expectations of obedience, Moses says, "Now I've done my job. I have taught you the rules and regulations that God commanded me to teach you. So you must live up to them. And by living up to them, you will be able to live well and take ownership of the promised land." Another way of saying this is that Moses had fulfilled his responsibilities, and now it was up to the people to respond appropriately, showing their wisdom and understanding. Now Moses knew Israel. He knew that these people would be tempted again to follow the ways of the nations that were around them, indulging in urges that still tempt Christians today. Moses asserts, "Practice these ordinances. You will become wise and understanding if you practice them. When people hear and see what you're doing, they will say, 'What a great nation. So wise, so understanding. We've never seen anything like it.'" When Moses urged the children of Israel to practice these ordinances, he was still talking to us today. While temptations arise in different forms for us, it sprouts from the same seed of sin and selfish desire. It is only through our prayerful, focused practice that we do not rationalize and fall back into the same sinful ways. Like a good coach before the championship of championships, Moses is giving the children of Israel a pep talk, a revival message to help them through the challenges that they will face ahead. Lifting their faith, Moses says, "What great nation is there that has a God so near whenever we call him?" Moses is reminding them of God's personal presence with Israel in the form of a cloud in the wilderness or the Ark of the Covenant. Just as Jesus wants us to have a personal relationship with God, Moses is encouraging the children of Israel here. He wants them to know that the God who made the world is also the God who responds to them when they pray. He is both powerful and personal. Moses tells them that Israel is special, so special that unlike any other nation, God gave them the law based upon the character of God. What other great nation has rules and regulations as good and as fair? Other nations were ruled at the whims of men. Israel had fair and just rules and regulations that reflected God. The nation's values were based on God. This set them far apart from all the other nations that surrounded them. In the final portion of our lesson, Moses reminds them of the day the generation before them, the Exodus generation, stood before the Lord God at Horeb. Out of the fire and smoke from an amazing display of power, that generation heard God and coveted in the form of 10 commandments. Just as Moses knew their tendency to revert to idol worship, God knows our tendency to place other things higher in priority. If that were not the case, why would only 1 out of 3 Christians in the Protestant denominations, that means all of us generally, why would only 1 out of 3 Christians read the Bible daily? Like Israel, we sometimes need a pep talk about how great our God is and why we should not have priorities greater in our lives. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.